some adjustments. Get all the technical things taken care of, and we'll get going. Bear with us a little bit because of the way we had to arrange things. We're kind of in a compacted space here, and so things aren't ideal. But hopefully you can see the pictures up there on the screen well enough to read them. I will be opening the curtains here after a little bit, and then you'll be able to see the picture a little better, and hopefully everything will be understandable, and you'll get the message. I'm going to be talking about the various aspects of the sanctuary services, and hopefully you can get kind of an overall picture of what went on there. I don't know if you can read that depending on where you're sitting. You might not be able to read all that's on the screen right now, but I'm sure you've heard the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You know, if you see something, it's easier to understand it. Now, some people can just hear something and they know what was said and they understand it. But some of us need to actually see something. You know, I'm sure that you've had a situation where you've got an appliance or a toy or something that needed to be assembled, and there was a lot of instructions. Sometimes there's a whole book of instructions on how to do this thing. And it's really helpful to have some pictures in there to know a little better what's going on. And so in that case, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, I don't know, I hope you can see that picture. It's, that picture is worth 1,000 words too. But anyway, okay, there we have a picture of the plumbing system in the house. If you were supposed to do the plumbing in your house, you know, there's whole manuals of what needs to be done for plumbing. But looking at a picture like that, you can understand a lot of the basics, and you can probably do a lot of things just by seeing the picture. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, in the plan of salvation, in the way God is doing things, there are a lot of aspects to the plan of salvation. Some of them are very detailed, some of them are very complex, some of them are very deep and hard to understand. And so He gave some pictures to help us to understand the plan of salvation. Psalm 119, verse 18. Open thou mine eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law. I'd like to read a little paragraph here that explains a little bit about why God gave the pictures in the sanctuary. This comes from a book by Stephen Haskell called The Cross and Its Shadow. Subjected to a life of incessant toil and surrounded by heathen darkness, the children of Israel lost sight of the significance of their simple sacrifices. On account of their servitude, being slaves, they were deprived of the privileges enjoyed by the ancient patriarchs of spending much time communing with God, and they drifted very near to Egyptian idolatry. They were totally surrounded by the religion of the Egyptians. When God brought them out of Egypt, He proclaimed His law from Sinai, and then gave them the same system of worship the patriarchs had followed. But He had to deal with them as with children, because they could not grasp the truths without the simple illustrations. God gave them the system of worship that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had followed, but in kindergarten form, just as we would use the kindergarten methods to teach children lessons which adults can easily comprehend. You know, when you have some kind of a visual aid, it's a lot easier to tell a story to kids. I mean, you know, what was being done right here just a couple minutes ago. You know, the pictures and the illustrations and all that. It's just a whole lot easier to get the message when you have the illustrations. And so that's what God did. He gave the sanctuary as an illustration and a picture of what he was trying to do. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And our scripture this morning from Exodus 25, verse 8. Gotta make sure my slides are changing in sync with what I'm trying to say. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. God wanted to be close to his people. He wanted to be there with them. And so he had them make the sanctuary and all that was in it as a place for him to be. And so what we have here is a nearly full-scale replica of the furniture as it was made for the sanctuary that was done in the wilderness. Now what you'll see behind the curtains is actually full-scale. This altar of burnt offering, I couldn't make it full-size because it would have been way too big. I wouldn't even be able to transport it around. It would have been at least twice this big and quite heavy and clumsy and everything. And so this is half-size, and the laver, we don't know what size that was because there's no measurements given, but it's close. And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things about all of this was that when God was giving Moses the instructions for the sanctuary, he said, be sure you make it according to the pattern I showed you. And he repeated that several times. The pattern. This is a copy of something. What I have here is a copy of what Moses made, and what Moses made was a copy of what God showed him. There is a real sanctuary in heaven. Moses was seeing the original that's in heaven so that he could make a copy of that. And in the book of Revelation, there's several places where it talks about various articles of furniture that are in the sanctuary. In Revelation 4 and 8, it talks about the altar, it talks about the candlestick, and various other aspects of the furniture. And it talks about, in the book of Hebrews, about Jesus being our high priest. Several different places it mentions that. And in Hebrews 4 verse 14, seeing then that we have a great high priest that has passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. Because we have a high priest there that is representing us. The heavenly temple, the abiding place of the King of Kings, where thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. That comes from Daniel 7 verse 10. That temple, filled with the glory of the eternal throne, where seraphim, its shining guardians, veiled their faces in adoration. No earthly structure could represent its vastness and its glory. Think of how massive the heavenly temple might have been and how beautiful. No earthly structure could represent its vastness and its glory. Yet important truths concerning the heavenly sanctuary and the great work there carried forward for man's redemption were to be taught by the earthly sanctuary and its services. There we have a picture of a model of Solomon's temple. You can't see it all. Maybe I should just open the curtains. You'll be able to see things a little better. I'll get the other side opened also. Then you can see the screen. Solomon's temple, some people consider that Solomon's temple was probably the most impressive, beautiful building that has ever been built. I mean, it was huge and made of white marble and gold and everything else. And yet, that verse that you see up on the top there, 2 Chronicles 2, verse 5 and 6, is something that Solomon himself said at the dedication of that temple. The house which I build is great, for great is our God above all gods. But who is able to build him a house, seeing the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain him? Who am I then that I should build him a house? take only to burn sacrifice beforehand. No matter what we make on the earth, it is very simple and plain compared to what is in heaven. The sanctuary in heaven is the very center of Christ's work in behalf of man. It concerns every soul living upon the earth. It opens to view the plan of redemption, bringing us down to the very close of time and revealing the triumphant issue of the contest between righteousness and sin. It is of the utmost importance that all should thoroughly investigate these subjects and be able to give an answer to everyone that asketh them the reason of the hope that is in them. And what I'm going to try to focus on here is not so much what each thing represents, because there are colors, the colors represent certain things, various articles represent certain things. I'm not going to focus on all the details. There's one thing that I want to focus on, and that is, what is the purpose of God in all of this? What is He really trying to do? And this quote here, through Christ was to be fulfilled the purpose of which the tabernacle was a symbol. That glorious building, its walls of glistening gold reflecting in rainbow hues, the curtains inwrought with cherubim, the fragrance of ever-burning incense pervading all, the priests robed in spotless white, and in the deep mystery of the inner place above the mercy seat, between the figures of the bowed worshiping angels, the glory of the holiest. In all, God desired His people to read His purpose for the human soul. This is to illustrate what God wants to do in us. It's not just details to look at and try to figure out what it means as far as, well, red represents this and gold represents that and all those details. God is wanting to get sin out of our lives. He wants to get sin eradicated from the universe. And what we see here is a picture of how He's doing that. And so that's what I want to look at. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Know you not that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? He wants to live in us. He didn't just come to live in this structure, in Solomon's temple. He wants to come and live in us. And so that's what we're looking at. As you study the sanctuary, any of you who have gone into the books of Exodus and Leviticus and all that, I'm sure you've noticed all the details that are there. There's just, God gave all the specifications of everything just the way He wanted it done. But He wasn't just giving all those instructions and all those details to fill space. They do have very specific meanings. And there's a lot there. And I hope that you will go home and study some of that to learn it a little better, to understand it better. And it takes time to think it through. And there's a lot of commentaries. There are a lot of places where you can get to explanations of things. But those details do have meaning. And so I encourage you to look into those details. But here we're just going to have an overview of the general picture of what it was for. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so greatly God as our God? The sanctuary explains God's ways. It helps us understand His ways. Okay, I've got a couple of quotes here again from the book The Cross and Its Shadow by Stephen Haskell. It is impossible to have exalted views of Christ's atoning work if the New Testament is studied without a previous knowledge of the deep, blood-stained foundations in the Old Testament Gospels of Moses and the prophets. The Old Testament Gospel. We don't think about the Gospel in the Old Testament very often, but it's there, and it's illustrated in all of these things. So kind of keep that in mind. And as we study what's in the Old Testament, we can have a better understanding of the New Testament when you get into some of those really deep theological books like Galatians and Romans and Hebrews. If you understand what's in the Old Testament, you can understand better what's in Hebrews. And what's explained in Hebrews helps you understand what's in the Old Testament. And so they go together and explain each other. And so it's important to look at both. I hope you can see that well enough to know what it is. Have any of you ever seen that in the night sky? That's called the Cat's Eye Nebula. It's up in the sky at night. But you can't see it with your eyes, because it's too dim. But with a telescope and with the right equipment, you can see it. The earthly sanctuary, with its types and symbols, is like the powerful lens of the telescope, which make it possible to view heavenly bodies that otherwise would be invisible. To the eye of the ignorant, these wonderful lenses appear like ordinary glass, but to the astronomer who longs to know the wonders of the heavens, is filled with rapture as he gazes through them. So again, what we're seeing here is a picture of what God is doing. In like manner, the Christian who will study the typical service of the earthly sanctuary not as a collection of dry, lifeless relics of ancient worship, but as a wonderful art gallery, where by the hand of a master artist the different parts of the marvelous plan of redemption are portrayed, will be astonished at the beauty revealed. The figures fairly speak to him as it were from the canvas. They tell the beautiful story of the Savior's love until his very soul is filled with rapture as he gazes upon them. There is a separate and distinct heavenly lesson taught by each of the different types and symbols of the earthly sanctuary service. And when they are all viewed together, they form a wonderful mosaic painting of the divine character of Christ as none but a heavenly artist could portray it. And one more quote here. In searching the Word of God, do not be content with superficial work. Many of the gems of truth lie deep. Ellen White uses the expression, the gems of truth lie deep, and one who looks only on the surface will not discover them. You must dig deep in the mine of truth if you would find its richest treasures. So I'm encouraging you, when you go home from here, you'll have an overview of the sanctuary, but you need to go deeper than that. So we can call this the Gospel Art Gallery. You know, God was the artist. He made the originals. Moses made a copy, and I made another copy. So we're looking at copies of the original. Okay. Here's a computer picture of the sanctuary with the actual sanctuary in the middle and the courtyard, the wall around the outside, and the various things there. I'm sure if you've looked at this in the Bible, read the descriptions, you kind of have a mental picture of that. One of the things that, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so kind of keep that in mind. You're going to be seeing a lot of pictures here and these objects to understand things better. As I've looked into the New Testament and basically through the whole Bible, one of the things that I've noticed is that the Christian life is like a journey. You have a starting point, you have the journey itself, and you have the destination, where you're going. Well, in the New Testament, in the Gospel that we have in the New Testament, we have the beginning point with the life of Jesus and the cross, the sacrifice at the cross. That's where we start. That's where we start with our salvation process, is with forgiveness and all that Jesus did there. Well, then, most of the rest of the New Testament is explaining the continuing experience. The book of Acts talks about the gospel spreading and the church developing. All of Paul's writings describe how to live the Christian life. Call that character development. That's our life process. That's where we are right now. And the final destination is in Revelation. Living with God. We're on our way toward that. And so we have the beginning with Jesus, we have our life now where we are, and our final destination is living with God. Okay, here we have, I hope you can see that. This bar in the middle is kind of not good, but a little bit with it. Here we have kind of a cutaway view of the sanctuary. We have the courtyard out here, the altar of burnt offering, which is right here. We have the laver, which is right there. And inside the holy place, we have various things like we see here, and I'll explain them a little bit. And then the most holy place was at the back. And Each of these areas has different purposes, different things happen there. We'll look first at the courtyard, and that's the open place out in front that was visible to the people. Now I opened these curtains for you to see in there. But ordinarily, in that sanctuary, these curtains were always closed. Nobody of the public ever saw what was in there. The priests were the only ones that could go in there, or if God told the people that it was time to move, the priests would go in and cover all of the articles of furniture in there, and then the Levites, after everything was covered, the Levites would come in and dismantle the whole structure and move all the furniture and everything to the new site. But ordinarily, this was kept closed. Right? Maybe some of you have seen the little books, Our Bible Friends, with the stories of David and Samuel and all that. And the story of Samuel shows him opening the curtains to the sanctuary. That never happened. That was totally off limits to any public eye. But, okay, so we have the outer court that was kind of the public area. There's the altar of burnt offering, and that's what we have right here. And that was made of acacia wood. I got to make sure I'm keeping things in order here. It was made of acacia wood, and I have a wooden structure here, and then it was overlaid with brass. Now, when I thought about an altar where there's a fire going on all the time, how could it be made of wood? But in Exodus 20, verse 24, God told the people, when you make an altar, make it an altar of earth. So in my conjecture, I'm thinking this wooden thing was just a shell around an altar of earth. The actual place where the burning was earth, dirt. And the wooden parts were far enough away so the heat wouldn't just burn everything up. But it was large. It was like 8 feet square and about 5 or 6 feet high. And it probably had a walkway around it, or some kind of way that the priests could step up so they could actually do something on there. Otherwise, they'd be reaching above their heads. You notice that on the corners here we have horns. Those horns were a symbol. Sometimes blood was put on them as a symbol of cleansing and atonement, but they were also symbolic of legal protection. You remember the story of when King David was getting old and it was time to have a new king. Well, David hadn't specified, or he had specified Solomon as the next king, but he hadn't actually gone through the legal ceremony of having him crowned the king. And Solomon's older brother, Adonijah, said, here's my chance. David is getting old, now's my chance to step in and become the king. So Adonijah declared himself king. And he had a bunch of supporters, and they kind of had a rally, and they crowned him king. Well, then when David actually made the legal announcement that Solomon was going to be king, somebody told Adonijah what had just happened, and he got scared. He said, I'm in trouble. If Solomon is the official king, and I tried to step in and take his place, I'm in trouble. And so all of his supporters ran for their lives, and Adonijah went to the temple and grabbed hold of the horns of the altar in the temple. That was a symbol of legal protection. And Solomon told Adonijah, okay, I won't kill you if you behave yourself. Don't try to do anything or you're at risk. And so he allowed him to go. Well, later on, Adonijah did something else and he got killed anyway. But that was a symbol of protection. When General Joab, when David died, he told Solomon, you take care of Joab. Joab was a murderer. Joab had killed some people totally illegally, and Joab was a murderer. I mean, being a general of an army, that's, when you go out and kill the enemy soldiers, that's legal. But Joab had done some things that were illegal, killing some people, and David himself didn't want to do that, didn't want to carry out justice on Joab. So he put the burden on Solomon. You take care of Joab. Well, when Joab realized that that was going to happen, he ran to the temple and grabbed hold of the horns of the altar. But because he was legally a murderer, that didn't protect him. Solomon told officers to go there and kill Joab anyway. It was legal protection if you were innocent, but it was not if you were guilty. The horns also were a symbol of power. You remember the story of King Jehoshaphat joining with King Ahab to defend the country against the Syrians. The Syrians were moving in, and they needed to gather their armies together. And Jehoshaphat said to Ahab, "Why don't you call the prophet in here and get some counsel from the prophet?" Well, Ahab didn't like that because God's prophets always talked against him. His own prophets were really positive. Oh, do what you're going to do. God is with you. But God's prophet didn't say positive things to Ahab. So Ahab didn't like to call in God's prophet. But to kind of please Jehoshaphat, he said, well, okay, we'll call the prophet. But meanwhile, one of his own prophets came in who had made a set of horns, iron horns, and he said, with these horns you will push the Assyrians out of the country. Horns were a symbol of power. Okay, so there is power and there is protection in the altar of burnt offering or altar of sacrifice. God's power is displayed there, and also protection, legal protection. Okay, now we'll look at the laver, which is the water basin over here. And like I said, we don't know how big it was, but it held a lot of water, because that was the place where the priests would wash their hands and feet before they did any of the services in the sanctuary. God required that they have clean hands and feet. And so that was